the next panel discussion, we're going to talk about making progress permanent, delivering on D&I objectives. 2020 was a wake-up call for many, and we needed to acknowledge that there is a lack of diversity within teams and organizations. With many heading back to the physical workspace, will diversity remain a top priority? In this panel with Hadley, Marina, Aisha, Ty, Joanna, and Naya will cover that. So thank you all very, very much, and we look forward to your discussion.
Thank you so much, Amber. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to meet you. My setup's a little multi-computer here, so can you hear me okay? Great. Welcome. Hi, Joanna.
Yeah. Hey.
As Amber said, this panel, or I'm not sure she said, so I'll say, as you all know, this panel today is about making progress permanent and delivering on diversity and inclusion objectives, not just right now because it's top of mind, but going forward and continuing to make it one of the most important things every day in the workplace, forever. So we have with us today, you all, panel of experts, expert perspectives. You represent multiple and wide-spanning accountabilities within advertising, marketing, media space, leadership from the employee side and client, revenue, external and internal facing, as well as third-party DE&I support partners. So the big question, and I think our real purpose here, is to discuss how we collectively lead our teams. How do we do our jobs in a way that produces evolutionary change, right? Like not just the revolution that, oh, this is important, but we evolve with that as leaders. So understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, what can we do to ensure accountability in our continued quest for diversity? So let me introduce each of you and an extraordinary group of women, I must say. Really would like to hear from each of you as I introduce why you're excited particularly about this conversation and what we're focusing on and that future of continued change and evolution and better, making things better and better and better and not falling flat. So I'll start with Marinda Yelverton, Vice President of Client Services for Whaler. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here for a meaningful conversation. I am Marinda, VP of Client Services at Whaler. We're a global tech-powered influencer company on a mission to liberate the creative voice. And I work with an amazing US team to bring creator-led brand partnerships to life. So thank you so much for having me. I think we're at a critical time in this pandemic that we're still in to continue these conversations, make sure the momentum stays the same because they're critical to the workplace, our environment, all of the above. So excited to be here and looking forward to a good conversation.
Thanks, Marinda. Ty Wingfield, Executive Vice President at Weber Shandwick. Hi, Ty.
Hi, thanks for having me. Ty Wingfield, I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion client offering specifically. So we're, United Minds is a management consultancy that sits within the broader Weber Shandwick network. And my role is to counsel our clients across industries and sectors on how to advance their DE&I strategies through storytelling, through better integration of their strategy across the business by partnering with our clients to ensure that their operating models are effective and efficient. It's been extremely busy past 19 months, but what's really excited me about these past 19 months, and I think similarly is exciting about this discussion, is every company, every organization is at such a different phase in their own DE&I journey. Every organization culture is different. So to your earlier point, Hadley, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. There are many different approaches, a lot of trial and error, and I think discussions like this just really help sort of put at the forefront best practices, what's working, what isn't, that other organizations may be able to adapt and drive internally as well. So I think, you know, the broader goal is advancing DE&I across our industry and externally as well. And if we can continue to have these types of discussions, hopefully this supports everyone on their own journeys.
Yeah, thank you, Ty. Absolutely. I'm aligned with everything you've said. And I have to say, and I'll reference this later if we have time with one of my questions directly to you, the no one size fits all, as it relates to this in particular, was top of mind to me after reading one of the articles you recently wrote. So I really enjoyed that, and I thought it was wildly insightful. So my goal is to have time for us to talk a little about it, and everyone should read it. I'll share the name of the piece later on in our conversation. Aisha Loesch, would love to hear from you next. You're the Senior Vice President of Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion at Hill Holliday.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so lovely to be here. I am Aisha. I am running our ED&I practice here at Hill Holliday, where I'm responsible for our strategies and working alongside our ELT and CEO to make the change permanent. So this topic is perfect for today because as we've talked about the momentum and the things that we've been moving through as a society, we can't just talk about it. We have to be about it. We have to put things into action. We have to change the systemic things that have been holding marginalized groups on the margins. And so I'm excited to be with you all today to share our best practices as well as learn.
Thank you. Joanna Feliciano. Hi, welcome. Joanna.
Yeah.
You got it.
Good morning. Yes. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am Joanna Feliciano. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Elevink. This organization was built and launched in the middle of the pandemic in June 2020. I partnered with the CEO, Claudia Vasquez. We both wanted to give back and really lift up underrepresented groups, provide them resources, take them to the next level. So this organization that we have put together and she has led from the ground up starting in June 2020 is focused on providing tools, professional development, cohort training, mentorship, panelist discussions. So we give that's our give back to the community. But in addition to that, I come from 20 years experience in the financial and insurance industry where I'm a business and market intelligence leader. So there I've spent most of my career, but Elevink is my passion. Giving back to the community is very important. And why I'm here today, why is this so important? I am looking to glean into the amazing panelists here today and really learn from them, but also continue the discussion of diversity. I believe during the pandemic, a lot of people were behind screens, behind cameras. Now we're at a point where the unmasking is occurring. People are going back into the workplace and are expecting measurable change. Things that change, it's not just check the box, having these low-level discussions, is making people accountable and expecting change and movement in the industry. So I'm excited to continue this discussion today. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. And I realized I never said who I am in the beginning. So Naya, before I ping to you, my name is Hadley Hout. I'm the Executive Director of Talent and Culture at The Atlantic, which is our HR broader function. Take it away, Naya.
Thanks for introducing yourself. Hello, everyone. My name is Naya Blair Hackford. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I serve as the Director of Inclusion at the NCAA. And so the NCAA, which stands for the National Collegiate Athletic Association, we're a member-led organization dedicated to the well-being and lifelong success of our college athletes. So in my role, not only do I help support our student athletes and our membership, which are coaches and administrators who support and lead our student athletes, but working working internally with our national office staff to help advance diversity, equity, inclusion, not only through our practices, but through strategies, providing resources, as well as trainings to help us to make sure that we're not only fostering an inclusive environment internally, but also for our external partners as well. And I'm really excited to be on this panel as well, to learn, as Joanne said, from the other panelists, and hopefully leave a few nuggets myself. And what's really exciting about this conversation is because in 2020, we know for a lot of reasons, right? It was a wake-up call, it was a pivotal year. And I remember hearing a lot of people talk about this as a moment. Right. And I kept thinking in 2020, what is 2021 going to be like, in 22 and 23 and 20, so on and so forth. And so I think this conversation is a reminder of how we in the DEI space need to make moments into deliberate movements for systemic change. And so I'm excited to hear the different ways organizations are doing it, and to remind us that that is the focus point, because a lot of times within the DEI space, we're not always thinking about the long term. And I think that this is a reminder for us to remember to do that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Naya. Nice to meet you. Thank you all for being present. I just want to say this because I think it's really important and part of the greater thing that we're talking about. I'd love for everyone, including the audience, who because of my not great eyesight and wanting to be focused and present here, I probably won't be digging into the chat. I'm so sorry, but I do want your feedback afterwards. So that's just a result of the virtual moderator role for me. But I would love for all of us to be open and vulnerable, and our panel, please be vocal here today, because these are voices that really matter. And to speak to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, Naya, 2020 was a long overdue wake-up call. Many companies and leaders hardly or didn't acknowledge with the gravity they should have acknowledged everything that we're finally taking seriously now, and thinking about critically and strategically, as a way for the audience to kind of get to know all of you through your specific roles as they relate to the topic, and we even connect with one another. I've sort of structured some initial questions in a way to help kick the conversation off that ties everything and frames it, touching on the things that you all were just talking about. So I'd love to start with you, Ty. Weber Shandwick recently cleaned up, I must say, congratulations, at the Purpose Awards for work delivering campaigns that put a positive cause or progressive movement at their center. It's a big feat, and directly relates to what we're talking about in terms of the work, not necessarily internally, but one's a result of the other, right? So in an article you recently wrote titled "The Standard Corporate Diversity Playbook Will Not Solve Inequity," you note the necessity of transformation through a holistic shift in how organizations operate and behave across internal and external practices, policies, and systems. As the executive vice president of Weber Shandwick's United Minds management consultancy group, as you noted in your introduction, you lead the organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion offering. So my first question for you is, what's changed internally during this time to ensure that people creating this award-winning work that was just highlighted at the Purpose Awards, as well as your employees who are driving the business, are equally a reflection of an inclusive, diverse, and equitable final product delivered to clients? And then I have a follow-up, maybe.
Great. No, it's a great question. Thank you for reading the article. It's I think our approach, the sort of holistic inside out approach, is the the approach that we take for every client. And again, I mean, the work, there is no one size fits all. There is no playbook for this, but starting with research, starting with listening and understanding, regardless of where you are in your journey, if you're an organization that's been doing this work for 25 years, to recalibrate and to, you know, make sure that you're on the right path requires data and listening and understanding. And that's very much the approach we take at Weber Shandwick as well. Particularly over the last year and a half, we did a lot of listening, a lot of talking, right? And I think many organizations, many of our clients were doing a lot of the same, understanding the pain points, both in terms of what our employees from various underrepresented groups are experiencing day to day and just their personal lives, but also how that is reflected and experienced inside of an organization as well. And I think listening and sharing stories just for the sake of listening and sharing stories does not move the needle. So I think importantly, what we're doing and what we've been doing at United Minds and Weber Shandwick is to apply the learnings to, you know, make critical changes, how we're staffing our teams, how we're building cultural competencies so that, to your point, Hadley, we can effectively serve our clients, right? Ensuring that we have the right talent, that all employees have a voice at the table, regardless of level, regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender. And so it is an ongoing change that, you know, we're driving forward. It takes work. It takes a lot of time, but we know that it's important. It's important so, you know, we can retain our talent so that people feel they're working for an organization that values them, where they belong, they feel challenged, but also and ultimately for the betterment of our client deliverables, making sure that our clients feel supported, that they have an agency that really understands the cultural nuances of the customers that they're serving day to day. So it is important to look at this work holistically to ensure that, you know, if you are, especially B2C, B2B, if you're, you know, serving clients or serving an increasingly diverse customer base, that internally you have a culture and representation that reflects that customer base as well. Otherwise, just the work that you produce, you're not as effective, you're not as able to innovate.
Sorry, can you share a little bit about that first piece that I would imagine is something that will be ongoing as part of that? How do we sustain and go beyond the last 18 months and the work that's been done and elevate that work continuously when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion in general. But I'm really curious about that first piece, the listening piece. How do you approach that, and in what format? Yeah,
that's a great question. And there are different ways. And I think the ways that you listen and gather information and data, the reasons and the outcomes are different, right? So I think one approach that's critical for any organization is to conduct and assess, conduct and gather quantitative data to really understand the current state of your culture. And this is work that we do within our own organization, assessing what the employee experience is like as it pertains to inclusivity, really peeling back the layers and understanding, you know, do your employees have access to relationship capital, right? And pulling back and sort of looking at the different demographic responses. Are women of color less likely to say that they have access to relationship capital? And if so, why is that? What's happening behind the scenes, right? Do your Asian American employees feel less likely to be heard in meetings in comparison to the majority? So gathering a lot of that data is an aspect of listening, right? Listening and understanding and sort of getting a benchmark of where you are in terms of the current state of your culture. I think the next step there is to then understand and better assess the at-risk groups that, you know, come up as a result of that data. Are there pockets of your employee base that are having very different experiences from the majority, right? host focus groups and really start asking the tough questions. And we always advise you have an external facilitator do that, because you're more likely to get honest and candid answers, right? And conducting focus groups in a way where there aren't those sort of power dynamics. You're not in a focus group with a manager of yours, right? So the fear of retaliation is diminished. But that's an aspect of learning and listening, and the data can then be used to inform your DE&I strategy or your business strategy going forward. And then, of course, I think what a lot of employees are familiar with, particularly from over the last year, are courageous conversations, as some call them, real talk discussions, but opportunities for global employee groups to come together and talk about something that's happening in real time in society. Topics that are top of mind and are being discussed internally within your organization. Maybe your company just rolled out psychological safety training, right? But there really isn't an understanding of what it is, why we're doing it in the first place. So having a discussion around what the topic is, right? Have people talk about when they have or haven't felt psychologically safe at work. But those are just other opportunities to really listen, to grow. There's you kind of have leaders sort of role model and share very personal stories about themselves, but also really take a kind of backseat and listen to other employees just share about their experiences. And again, it's just another mechanism to listen and to learn and evolve. But that sort of data capturing exercise is the critical first step, again, regardless of where you are in your DE&I journey, as a chance to either just start out or to recalibrate and reassess where you may need to make tweaks or adjustments in how you're approaching this work.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. I think it's really important, some of the things you said about the how. Like not being intentional about the way you're listening, and giving people an opportunity to be heard. You might as well not do it at all, so I really thank you for that. Marinda, I would as the Vice President of Client Services for Whaler, you're in a revenue-driven position, right? You're not necessarily every day coming in accountable in your job title for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I've heard your global head of talent and people, Eddie Renard, speak about Whaler as a company setting the temperature, not simply reading it, when it comes to changing industry standards regarding diversity and inclusion. Can you share how that thermostat versus thermometer, rather. I really enjoyed that metaphor, so I was stealing that, Eddie, wherever you are. How that metaphor translates to your work leading a team during this time, and going forward, how will you continue to keep diversity and inclusion at top of mind for your client-facing leadership position?
Absolutely, sure. It's definitely, it's something that we keep a pulse on, in the sense of we make sure that we're representative of what it is that we put in front of our clients as well. So it's marketing, right? We're working with brands, we're bringing their, campaigns to life, we're recommending, and you can't just talk about diversity. You can't just be a buzzword. And so we make sure that we are reflective of that. Like, what does the world look like around us? We make sure that we embody that, and we have those perspectives that go into the work, the strategy, what we present to our brands and our clients in that way. We also keep a strong pulse on the US Census, right? And understanding, okay, the creators that we tap into for some of these brand partnerships, some of these campaigns, that we're constantly aligned to kind of what, literally what the US makes up of, and making sure that those percentages of active creators that we're working with, developing relationships with, embody those percentages, and it's aligned in that way.
Thank you. And anyone jump in, or, I don't know, raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable doing when something grabs you or you want to expand on something. I know we have limited time, so after these initial questions, my goal is to hear the things that this is generating.
I do want to, Thank you, Headley. I did want to, some of the things that you guys have already talked about thus far, did make me think about just in the last 18 months, right? It has impacted us all in so many different ways. And the height of the pandemic, George Floyd, and so much more has done that. And what I love about the pandemic, right? It's a interesting word to use, love. Although challenging, what it did was it stretched us to the point where people lost their filter. And the conversation actually became more real for the first time, which I think is super important. And not something regulated by like a HR handbook, but real and honest. And it's forced a level of consciousness on organizations, people that we've never had before. And I think there's no place to go back, you know, now that that filter is gone.
Yeah, that's actually, thank you.
I would like to add, listening to the conversations of both of you, listening is one of the things that has really happened in the organizations, but what's also transpired in the pandemic is people have become vulnerable to have these discussions, vulnerable and humble. Even leaders are becoming humble to lean in and say, hey, I don't understand this topic that well, but I'm willing to listen to your story. I'm willing to understand it. And how can I step in and change some policies, work with HR, and provide the safe environment? So, you know, the pandemic, even though it separated us from organizations, what it brought forward was the realities of these discrepancies, these, you know, systematic challenges that the workplace is having, and bringing it to the forefront where now people are more humbled, are having these discussions, are more vulnerable, and being more open and not holding it back. And I love your point about filter. The filter is gone. It's, you know, for many years, people were being filtered. Oh, we can't share this in the workplace. We have to leave ourselves at the door in the workplace. That's not happening anymore. People are being, you know, coming forward and having those conversations and knowing that they're challenging and going to be tough.
That's a great, that everything you say actually leads me into what I was going to address in my question to you. So I'm just going to ask you to expand on that in a couple specific ways. So thank you for that perfect sequitur. I'm really curious about, you were coming from a different perspective. Everyone here is, but you are working for a company, like you said, that started during the pandemic. I mean, in 2020. And you created this company with Claudia, the founder. Yes. What is Elevink's, what's that word we all use in advertising all the time? That phrase, your unique value that previously did not exist. What does Elevink bring to the table at this critical time, even when companies are starting to make it a priority, you know, to have these departments or these dedicated conversations, or just frankly listening? And how do you model that to be proactive rather than reactive? You know, arguably kind of reactive, forming it at this time and not 5 years earlier. So I'd love to hear about that. If that makes sense, that question.
Yeah, one thing when Claudia and I met for the first time and had our conversation, we both were with the mission, as we've spent 20 plus years in the insurance and financial services industry, really hearing that, you know, there's no representation on the top levels, that people that look like us. Why is that? Even though we may have the credentials, but we were not in those C-level rooms. We were not having those conversations. We were not on those boards. And her and I joined and said, we have to do something about this. What is really going on? And if you look at the statistics, a lot of people of color, Hispanics and Blacks and different underrepresented groups are graduating universities, are coming into the workforce, but it's like they're being left at the lower levels. What is going on? So we decided to get Elevink together, not as responsive to really the pandemic, it happened that way. It was lined up that way, but was really to use our network and things we've learned the last 20 years. And how can we pour into these underrepresented groups and say, hey, have the confidence, go into those rooms, have those discussions with your managers, get development plans together, look at an organization from the outside and say, hey, do they stand up and line up with my values? Do I want to work there? What's their sustainability plan? What is the diversity strategies they have in place? So we focus, we're at the outside, we're trying to educate and bring people to awareness in these underrepresented groups to say, hey, when we walk in that door in that interview, we're going to ask you those tough questions. We're not just going to be focused on getting the job. We're going to ask you, what's your diversity strategy? What's your plan to elevate women of color? What's your plan? What is your talent development plans? What is your leadership development programs? So having those toolkits and pouring into these cohorts that we teach on Mondays, and we have a huge community of people that follow us, is really ensuring that we're bridging those gaps and we're elevating them and providing them that information. So yes, we're looking at it from an outside perspective, but there's such a huge population out there that's kind of like, looking, what's the next step? How do I take advantage of this diversity movement that's going on? So that's our job. Our job is to pour into these people.
And that's great, because I think it speaks to how we started this conversation, and like the change being elevated change and sustainable, and precisely why your company is created. I'm curious, Aisha, as someone who joined Hill Holiday, I think a year ago, right? Is that correct? I mean, what a time to join a company. We've all hired people during this time, I'd love to hear from your perspective, joining in the role that you joined. Did that exist? Did diversity, equity, inclusion exist in the company as in senior leadership as its charge, in the way that your role, you're tasked with that? And where did you start, and what was the biggest challenge?
Absolutely. So yes, the role was there prior to me joining, and I started there 7 months pregnant. So that was also a really fun time to be joining an organization in a pandemic, and in my third trimester, or soon to be third trimester. So at Hill Holiday, and where we came together was, for me as jumping into a new culture, was assessing. So a lot of what Ty spoke about was understanding what I was coming into, understanding where our leaders were, hearing from the talent, understanding where the pain points are and where we've done really great things. IPG does a climate for inclusion survey across the whole organization and globally. So I was able to glean a lot of great data from that tool to be able to see the pockets from all different lenses of diversity, not just around race, but gender, disability, LGBTQ, IA, veteran status. So I was able to take a lot of that data in and just start to create a strategy from there. We also partnered very closely with our business resource group. So there were organizations that were already there, but just needed to have a little bit more fire put behind them, getting some branding, getting the teams together, giving the leadership some very, very needed visibility to senior leadership, as well as compensation, right? These folks that are doing and running these BRGs and business resource groups or employee resource group, it's extra work. And it's kind of an extension of the ED&I strategy. So coming in and working with leadership to have that come in and started was a great place to start, as well as having the leadership support all the things that we kind of brought in new from either unconscious bias training that hasn't happened. You mentioned courageous conversations. We've been partnering with Glenn Singleton for a number of years now to have those courageous conversations within our space. And then what happens after? How are we continuing the conversation? Our policies have been updated, did a full audit on that, and always just looking for ways to evolve and ensure that our talent is feeling supported each and every day.
Can I ask you something about just a couple steps back, something you mentioned? And I'm curious everyone's take on this. You mentioned the obvious extra heavy lift, people leading and participating in ERG's experience, especially when they're tasked specifically with something like outside of a diversity focus group for better practices in the organization or something like that. When that's the case, when ERGs exist in that way in an organization, and there's that extra lift. What are your thoughts on some companies compensate the leaders involved in those groups? Also, I've heard Caroline Wanga, who I don't know if you're familiar with, but I'm obsessed with her. I mean, all I want to do is watch her, hear her. I mean,
all the things.
If anyone's looking for just a powerful speaker, like everything she says, I'm like, that's a quote I want to use. It was hard not to like write these questions with out just, you know, saying exactly what she says. But she raised a good point in an interview she did not too long ago, where she said that's expected and that has to be messaged. I mean, in my opinion, this was a good point, but I don't believe it's everyone's opinion. So I want to understand other points of view here. Compensating for doing that work, like that work should come with the production work you're doing as a producer coming in. That work should come with any role coming into a company, period. You know, sure, ideally that's true, but also recognizing that people are putting extraordinary effort, you know, in order to engage the other employees and sustain something going forward. What are your thoughts on that? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I believe compensation is 100% right on. I think it's a lot of extra work. They are going above and beyond their roles. And so full stop, I think, yes, do it if you can, or if you can't figure out other ways of giving them some type of additional benefit, either to senior leadership or to professional development or course, whatever they're needing so they can feel supported by the organization. Because business resource groups, not only do they support the business, they create community. It's about the culture. It's a place for people to go and feel seen and heard with folks that are within their affinity. So it goes beyond just kind of having an event. It creates our culture and it makes people want to stay within our space. So I'm feel free. I see everyone's hands went up, so I'll pass the mic, but I just wanted to kind of just double down on that for sure.
I was going to say, Naya, jump in because I know you have.
Okay, I was like, wait.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, Naya, we haven't heard enough from you.
Okay. No, thank you. I agree with you know, what's already been stated, but I'd also say that, you know, if organizations don't have the funds or ability to pay, you know, right then for the work, also like tying it to performance evaluation, because a lot of times individuals who are part of employee resource groups or EEGs, it seems like, oh, that's something extra in your spare time. But reality is it's not spare time, and it's a heavy lift, and it really impacts the culture of an organization. And so how do we incorporate the work that individuals are doing in EEGs into the performance evaluation process? And so a lot of time performance evaluations are not only tied to merit, but bonuses and other ways that can help supplement, you know, income and help recognize individuals for the great work that they're doing, that again, really is a part of making our cultures better in our organizations. And again, you know, what Aisha already said about to professional development and even just the recognition, because a lot of times in organizations, individuals who are leading and a part of EEGs are not even recognized in a way for their work. And so how do we, you know, recognize the work that's being done in addition to, you know, their job, right? So thanks.
Thank you. I know we don't have that much time left, and we've all brought it up in one iteration or another. So a recently realized result of the pandemic that's just truly recently being talked about now is the staggering number of people quitting their jobs. Derek Thompson wrote an excellent article recently for The Atlantic titled "The Great Resignation is Accelerating." And this rate of quitting is really an expression of optimism that says we can do better as individuals. In turn, companies are increasingly being held to a higher standard in general when it comes to employee engagement and making the prospect of diversity-driven hiring practices less pronounced. I mean, that's the first place my mind went when I was reading Derek's piece. Like that fear, like, how will this set that back? And, you know, I'm curious what you all think of that, and just on employee engagement and retention in general, and given this new knowledge that we have at this time coming out of the pandemic, you know, that this is a general thing. People are leaving without other jobs, for other jobs they otherwise wouldn't be looking, but they are no longer okay just, you know, sitting in for security, and like they want to actually be happy. What are your thoughts on that? On how to keep it galvanized, you know, keep your workspace galvanized and getting new perspectives and voices in continuously going forward?
I'd love to jump in on that, Hadley. I think it's, you know, it's a couple of things, right? So, you know, what people inherently care about now has changed, it's evolved. What we value has definitely grown in the last year or so. And people are not going to stay anywhere where diversity, if there is a mission of diversity, which there should be, but it's not apparent in the everyday experience of the work, the teams that they, you know, are on, what they're producing, and the general experience. And that's why when we have conversations around returning back to the workplace, I think those conversations need to be in diverse rooms, because everyone's experience in the office setting is not the same and doesn't give nostalgic feelings, right? And so when it comes to retention, making sure that you know, that experience is really embodying your mission as a company, it's apparent, making sure diversity is at the top and everywhere in between, because that impacts the perspectives, that impacts, you know, the conversations that you're having, the work that you're doing, and all of those things matter. And especially as the workforce, you know, is younger and younger, people are, you know, coming out of college, looking at companies, you know, when you're going after, say, for instance, talent from amazing HBCUs, making sure that your company has representatives there that can speak to some of these, you know, people that are, you know, getting into the workforce. They want to see someone that can possibly be a mentor or model their careers after. So it's about the tactics. It's got to be interwoven into every single thing.
Oh.
No, please.
I was just going to say, please, we can go over a couple minutes. I mean, everyone does.
Well, my quick ad there is definitely for retention, attracting talent, but also employees, prospective talent, and consumers, right? They're expecting that companies' values and what they stand for or against in terms of societal issues maps to the employee and consumer values as well. So no longer is it okay for an organization to sort of play neutral or stand on the sideline on issues that historically haven't been discussed in the workplace: voting rights, abortion, you know, transgender laws. Every issue now, companies are expected to have a position, right? And as people resign from their roles and look for that next opportunity, they're looking at that as well. They want to make sure, if you're saying you stand for diversity and inclusion, you stand for Black Lives Matter, that you are actually standing for that in every aspect of how you operate.
Absolutely, and speaking to action, and you know, what kind of an ally are you as a company? So thank you all so much. I feel like there are so many things I didn't get to ask, but I'm really excited to just continue to follow each and every one of you in everything you do, and it's impressive, and thank you for your time, and thank you for, I'll say in the universe, female Quotient for letting us be here at in the lounge for this time, and thank you so much. I know we're over time. Thank you, Amber.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Hadley, Miranda, Aisha, Ty, Joanna, and Naya, for your wonderful insights and sharing, making progress permanent, delivering on D&I objectives. You know, it's really important that we're asking the tough questions during the hiring process, remaining intentional about our practices and the infrastructure we build, as well as our feedback loops. And we're also being open and honest with ourselves as an organization about where we are and where we want to go.